What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The Mississippi State Bulldogs are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what Mississippi State did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for Mississippi State. My projection for them was quite high at 5-7, and then my prediction for them was 3-9. So when it came time to do Mississippi State's prediction and projection, the projection is just based off of what they did in 2023, and then obviously the prediction is just based off of what they had coming back and everything, but they just didn't have the roster talent, so that's why I predicted them to go 3-9 plus the schedule. It was very brutal in the SEC for sure for Mississippi State, and I think that's the reason why they went 2-10 because of how tough the schedule was, but plus they lost a couple of non-conference games in 2024. You look at their schedule from last year in 2024, and again, they were 2-10 with this schedule. Again, it was a tough schedule in the SEC, which we'll get to here in just a moment, but in the non-conference, they played Eastern Kentucky on the road at Arizona State out of the Big 12, then they played Toledo, and then also UMass. So they beat Eastern Kentucky and UMass. That was the only two games that they won last year, and then obviously they lost to Toledo, a decent group of 5 team. So yeah, that was a tough game there for Mississippi State to lose, and very embarrassing to lose as well. And then they played on the road at Arizona State. Of course, the Sun Devils ended up being a really good team the rest of the way forward after that game. So yeah, a pretty tough non-conference schedule. And then in the SEC, it was very brutal for them. At home last year, they played Florida, Texas A&M, Arkansas, and Missouri. So yeah, not a bad home schedule, but Florida ended up being really good last year. They finished the season pretty strong. Texas A&M was pretty good. Arkansas and Missouri were two pretty average teams, but yeah, they lost all their home games in the SEC, and then also on the road they played Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, and Ole Miss. That is a very brutal road schedule there in the SEC. So again, winless in the SEC for Mississippi State in 2024 in first-year head coach Jeff Lebby's first season as the Mississippi State coach. Does 2025 get better for Mississippi State? Well, it does really not get better. The schedule is going to be tougher again, especially in the SEC. They just flipped the home and away games. And before we go game by game, let's take a look at who Mississippi State plays in the non-conference this season. So you look at their non-conference schedule, they will play on the road at Southern Miss, Arizona State out of the Big 12 again, but they will play the Sun Devils at home this time. And then they play Alcorn State and then also Northern Illinois. So this is kind of a tough non-conference schedule again, but Southern Miss and Alcorn State, maybe they'll be favored by a big margin in both of those games, but they got to play Southern Miss on the road to kick off the year. Yeah, that's just a really weird way to kick off the season. Northern Illinois is not a guaranteed win. That's a team that of course upsetted Notre Dame last year, so I wouldn't be surprised if Northern Illinois upsetted Mississippi State in 2025. Wouldn't really call it an upset if that were to happen, but yeah, that's just not a guaranteed win. Alcorn State probably the easiest game here on this schedule, and then you got Arizona State again, but this time they will play the Sun Devils at home. And that's going to be a pretty tough Arizona State team to beat. They do have a lot of production coming back, and they probably will possibly be a top 15 team and possibly the favorite in the Big 12 again. So once again, it's a pretty tough non-conference schedule for Mississippi State. Let's go to their home games now in the SEC. And like I said, the teams that they played on the road last year, they will play them at home, and the teams that they played on the road at home last year, they will play them on the road. They just flipped the home and away games in the SEC. So at home, they'll play Tennessee, Texas, Georgia, and Ole Miss. These are all the teams that they played on the road last year. Boy, this is a very tough and brutal home schedule for Mississippi State. It is going to be very difficult for Mississippi State, and it's going to take a miracle for them to either probably win one of these 4 games. Tennessee definitely going to be a top 25 team. Texas possibly could be the favorite to win the national championship. You got Georgia, who is very talented, and then you got the Egg Bowl against Ole Miss. Maybe they have a decent shot in that game because Ole Miss may not be as good as they were last year. They had to rely on transfers, but still, the Rebels are definitely the more talented team. So this is just a very tough home schedule for Mississippi State in 2025. We now go to their road games. They'll play on the road at Texas A&M, at Florida, Arkansas, and then Missouri. So they played these teams all at home last year. This time they will play them on the road. Very tough road schedule as well. Texas A&M, a very tough place to play. Same thing with Florida. And then you got Arkansas. That's also kind of a tough place to play. Missouri is not a tough place to play, but, that's still on the road. So that's going to make it tricky there for Mississippi State to win. So, yeah, very tough road schedule. Let's go back to the schedule now and go full game by game now for the Bulldogs. They will kick things off with Southern Miss on the road on August 30th, and then they come back at home to play that big non-conference game against Arizona State on September the 6th. And then they play Alcorn State on September 13th. And then they play Northern Illinois at home on September 20th. So they play all four of their non-conference games to kick off the season. And let's say this. Let's say if Mississippi State gets off to a 4-0 start, that's the start you kind of want here, going into SEC play. But then it will get tougher for them as they go into SEC play. But if they were to lose to Arizona State and then probably beat Northern Illinois, they would probably get off to a 3-1 start, which wouldn't be a bad start. But you'd like to beat Arizona State, to be honest, there on September 6th. But worst case scenario as a start, they probably start 2-2. If they were to lose one of these group of 5 matchups. So yeah, Mississippi State, they got to get off to a really good start in order to have like a pretty good season and a better year in 2025. But they do open up SEC play at home on September 27th against Tennessee. Then after that, they'll play on the road at Texas A&M on October 4th. And then they get their first bye week, not until October the 12th. They go on the road coming out of the bye week to play Florida on October 18th. So they got back-to-back road games there with Texas A&M and Florida. It's not in back-to-back weeks, though, which is really good news. But then they play Texas at home on October 25th, and then they get Arkansas on the road on November 1st, then Georgia at home on November 8th, Missouri on the road November 15th before closing things out with Ole Miss and the Egg Bowl at home on November 29th. They also get a bye week before playing the Egg Bowl. So once again, it's another tough schedule for Mississippi State in 2025, and it's definitely going to be pretty difficult for this Mississippi State team to win an SEC game and also make it to a bowl game this year. But let's get a projection and find out what the projected record is for Mississippi State. This is the scale I'll be using here for their official projection. Basically a 1% game in the red, that's pretty much your guaranteed loss. 20% in the orange, that's where Mississippi State will be definitely a double-digit underdog. So we're talking about 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that point range. And then 40% in the yellow, that's where Mississippi State will be like a clear underdog, so 6 or 7 points, so less than a touchdown. And then 50-50 games, those will stay in the white, games that really could go either way. You're probably not going to be seeing any 50-50 games on here, though, for Mississippi State. And then same thing with the purple, but the purple games for our Mississippi State where they'll be favored by, less than a touchdown, so 6 or 7 points. And then 80% in the blue, they'll be favored by double digits. And then obviously the green games at 99%, that's pretty much your guaranteed win. So we'll start with those guaranteed wins here for Mississippi State. You got a couple of those. You got Southern Miss and Alcorn State. The difference between these two games, though, I think Alcorn State is definitely a game that's over that 95% range to like 99%. That game right there should be a blowout where Mississippi State probably should score like 40 or 50 points. And then Southern Miss, maybe that game is probably closer to 90% and also closer to 80% in the blue. But yeah, I'm going to put it in the green for right now. Southern Miss, not a great team out of the group of 5 last year, but I think Mississippi State won't be favored by much. I mean, it probably could just be by 17 points. It's not in that couple of touchdowns range, but it's definitely a game that you don't want to sleep on because it's the first game of the season. So yeah, the difference between these two games, I think Alcorn State is going to be a blowout, and then Southern Miss, obviously, it could be just like a 20-point win for Mississippi State, or maybe even a 17-point win just because it's on the road. But yeah, those are your 2 guaranteed wins there for Mississippi State, and then I'm going to put the Northern Illinois game here in the blue for right now. And look, I know this is a game that should be in the purple, but it's at home for Mississippi State. That's the reason why it does fall into that blue range at 80% in my opinion, in that range there particular for Mississippi State. Yeah, it's not a guaranteed win just like the green games are. It's definitely counted as a win, but it's not a guaranteed win. This is a game that Mississippi State definitely could lose because, again, Northern Illinois is a team that beat Notre Dame last year, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did beat Mississippi State here. But I think the Bulldogs will be favored here again by double digits, by like 10 to 14 points, so by about a couple of touchdowns. Again, not a guaranteed win, but it's still counted as a win here in this projection. And then obviously the rest of the schedule, Mississippi State is going to be definitely underdogs in the rest of their games. I don't have any games though in the red, surprisingly, but most of their games come here in the 20% range in the orange in the SEC. Again, that's every game here in the SEC. You got Tennessee, Texas A&M, Florida, Texas, Arkansas, Georgia, Missouri, and Ole Miss. So all their SEC games, they're not guaranteed losses, but they will definitely be double-digit underdogs in all, these SEC games. 8 total SEC games. I mean, that's just a lot of games that you have to be underdogs in. But again, Mississippi State is definitely not on the level of any of these teams yet. Tennessee definitely, the reason why Tennessee, Texas, and Georgia all end up in the orange, and then same thing with Ole Miss, it's because they're all playing at home in all these games. Now, Texas A&M, Florida, Arkansas, Missouri, I was very close to putting these games in the red, but I'm going to put them in the orange for right now. So these games are also counted as losses, but not guaranteed losses, just like the red games are. But yeah, I just don't know if Mississippi State can win any SEC game this year because of how tough this schedule is. And basically, they have a tough home schedule with some big-time home games against Tennessee, Texas, Georgia, and Ole Miss. So yeah, all 8 of these games in the conference, they will be double-digit underdogs by like 10 to 14 points, but it could definitely be more than that. These games are definitely closer to that red, in that red percent there, like the 1% range. So yeah, they will be definitely double-digit underdogs in all 8 of these SEC games. And then you got one game here in the yellow, which they'll have a decent chance of pulling off an upset here, and that's Arizona State here in the non-conference. Now, the Sun Devils are going to be a pretty good team. They definitely should be a top 15 team, but it's early in the season, and Mississippi State definitely could give Arizona State some problems here, but I still think Mississippi State will be definitely a clear underdog by like 6 or 7 points. I think Arizona State might be the better team as of right now, but, playing at home, that does give Mississippi State here to pull off definitely an upset here in the early part of the season. And like I said, if they can get off to like a 4-0 start going into SEC play, maybe that does give them momentum heading into 2025, but yeah, they'll be definitely a clear underdog. So we're talking about less than a touchdown against Arizona State at 6 or 7 points. So yeah, that's a yellow game there in my opinion for Mississippi State. So what does the projected record come out to be here for Mississippi State for 2025 based on how tough this schedule is? Well, we count the couple of green games as wins, and then you count the Northern Illinois game as a win as well. Then you count the orange games here in the SEC as losses, and then you average out that one game in the yellow at 40%. And, odds would say they can probably pull off an upset there against Arizona State, but odds would say they probably don't do that. But, they got their 3 wins here in the non-conference. That's going to give them a projected record of 3-9. So that is what the projection is for Mississippi State. So yeah, no surprise here. The projection is very low here for the Bulldogs. I think best case scenario would have to be like 4-8, and then worst case probably going to be 2-10, just like they were from last year. But yeah, we'll see if Mississippi State can turn things around, but this is just another tough schedule. It's definitely one of the tougher schedules in the SEC in my opinion. So yeah, that is my projection for Mississippi State. Do you guys agree or disagree with their projection? Down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.